I talk, you listen, and something you hope will happen. What I want to do to start out with is find out what you're expecting. What's the one question you would like answered? What's the one point you'd hope to learn from our time together? And if you could just share a few sentences. I'm here because I was thinking storytelling would be important. Why? And then if you could also share, what is it about storytelling that you're already familiar with? For example, I know we have a lawyer in the room, and he uses storytelling in the courtroom. So he says, well, maybe he could do something better about storytelling. I don't know. So if we could just go around the room and see what is it you know about storytelling, and what's the one thing you'd love to get by the end of our time together. Sound fair? So I'd like to get to know you. I want to know who I'm talking to so that I can adjust accordingly. Okay. Sir.
Okay, Edwin Kwan. I mean, I know quite. I mean, I've been to quite a number of storytelling things, but the real intriguing thing is how much of content is storytelling. How much to tell?
How much
when
to tell?
Stop.
When to stop? Okay. And then, so that's one thing you'd like to learn. And the other thing is, I have a perspective about storytelling. That storytelling is a tool to do something. So you're all in business. You want to, just not just idle talk. What would you, if you could deliver the perfect story, what would you like to accomplish?
To get the other person to buy in.
Just something.
Yeah.
Okay.
Overwhelming buying in.
Okay, great. And what industry are you in?
Well, I mean, you could say automotive.
Okay. All right. So there it is. Storytelling for buy-in, and the question is, the challenge, how much to tell and what to leave out. Okay.
Okay, so I'm Pierre. I'm working in executive search. Okay. So my expectation today is to say how to adapt the story to the audience. Of course, we have a lot of stories and we use them to convey messages, but the audience can be different.
Mm-hmm.
So how you adapt, and so that you can adapt the story, the length, the intensity to the audience, so that you better convey the message which you wish to convey.
Now, you're an executive search.
Yeah.
You're recruiting C-level executives, for example. So I'm just curious, where does storytelling fit into that?
We give conferences.
Okay.
I give conferences.
Okay.
So we're regularly invited to deliver speeches, sharing, and of course storytelling. When 1 million years ago, when there was no TV, storytelling was an important time in the humanity, mankind story.
So there you are. There's 100 or 500 or 1,000 people in the audience,
Yeah.
and you'd like to engage them with a story, for example.
Yes, and I can tell you the audience can be quite diverse, because sometimes it's businessmen, sometimes it's Shanghai government, sometimes it's conferences, sometimes it's our clients. So that can be very diverse.
So one of your challenges is how to adapt a story for the audience?
Yeah, select the story and make it most efficient to convey the message or the information you wish to convey.
Okay, so that's as part of presentation skills, you'll say. Okay, how much to tell. And in your case, was that also as part of the presentation? You would be wondering how much to tell and how much not to tell during presentation
the
skills?
challenge is that I think a lot of executives, they rely on a PowerPoint, to say something.
Yeah.
But the challenge is that sometimes in a forum where you don't have a PowerPoint, suddenly you engage in a Q&A.
Yeah.
How then can you tell a story without words, without a visual thing, and you can tell a story
Without the PPT?
without a picture.
Okay, all right. So in any case, it sounds like similar interests during a presentation. Okay. Now, from Standard Chartered, we talked a little bit, so I'd like to, if you could share what you told me.
Well, the purpose of my attending attendance is really to help the bank to equip our senior leaders with the ability to storytell, because the bank has gone through quite a lot of changes recently, and then we feel that instead of passing down PPTs or tons of communication through paper, it will be good for the senior leaders to share their change stories, with the audience, so that it gives them more engagement, more connections. So I think that's one of the reasons. Another reason is that in SCB, for our facilitator, we actually have to go through the certification process. And in order to get to an expert level, according to the ASTD standard, you have to be a good storyteller.
Oh.
And then, so in a way, I'm looking for, again, possibilities to help my own team to be able to storytell, because I find a lot of trainers in the banking industry, they tend to be very expert in technical aspect, okay? But when it comes to influencing, when it comes to sharing a compelling story and to get people to change that paradigm, it's quite difficult for them. So that's why I'm here. And I don't have any expectation, because this is my first storytelling session that I'm attending. So I'm open to anything. So I think I will take away quite a lot of new learning and new insights on storytelling.
Now, earlier today, you talked about you used the phrase storytelling culture.
Yes.
And what does that mean to you?
It's when we talk about culture, we're talking about a norm. So I think culture means to me that whenever we need to communicate, we embed personal stories into what we need to share. So to me, that's a culture.
Okay, good. So we can talk more on. So let's see. Yes, great. Thanks very much. Teresa's my great, loveliest professional assistant. Professionally. Not good. Let's see. Lee.
Hi, I'm Lee. I'm Yishing. I'm from Singapore, and I'm practicing lawyer at the Shanghai office. Larry was saying we tell stories to judges, but we don't.
Oh, look. Yeah.
We don't tell stories to judges. I came here because I read that this is something. If I'm someone who needs to engage teams, motivate staff, that's what I need to do. And
Okay.
the challenge for me is, I think there are lots of stories now. People pass stories to each other on emails, but how do I use a story in a way which doesn't dumb them down, my stuff?
Yeah.
Because there's too much chicken soup stories.
So
How do I use it?
So this is to engage your staff is one thing. So not in the quorum. So this is within, internal, and then also a bonus would
Might
be.
be useful in the outside, yes.
Yeah, a bonus would be at conferences and in the court, right? Okay, so 3 uses, but it's about engaging, connecting, motivating. There it is. Fred, now you're with a famous hotel, a luxury hotel, right? Yeah. Okay.
Actually, I think I am the youngest boy here. I lack of many experiences. 1 year ago, I used to be a recruitment assistant in this hotel. So my first expectation is, for the hotel industry, the resignation rate is really high.
What's the word? Rate?
Resignation.
Resignation, turnover.
The turnover. Yeah.
Okay.
So especially in China, in the hotel industry of China. So my every day to recruit. My job is to recruit more people. So that really make me headaches. So I want to know how I can communicate with the staff and help our company, help our hotel to reduce the
Turnover.
resignation rate.
Okay.
And now for me, I am a L&D, actually trainee officer in this hotel, the general hotel. And my second expectation here is to gain some experience, some skills to make my class maybe interested by our staff.
What was the word to make your Interesting.
Our colleagues.
Colleagues,
Yes, our
colleagues, or your staff?
Yeah,
Okay,
outside.
okay. So again, an internal use, engage the employees,
Yes.
and reduce turnover.
Yes.
So that would have a huge value to your company if you didn't have to replace all those.
Yes.
Yeah.
Definitely.
So this is a high value
Yes.
benefit.
Yeah.
High value benefit. Okay. So now I understand a little bit about. Greg, do you want to have?
You know, I've been in China 30 years, right? I have lots of stories to share. I want to learn how to tell those stories succinctly and be able to connect with people to make those stories relevant for people today. That's what I would like. I guess the connection and the sense of relevance. And I'm also an executive coach, so I'd like to learn more about how to tell a story in a very short, succinct manner that connects with the coachee as well.
Dear CJ.
Yes.
Thank you so much for including me in your program today. In your life as a trainer, coach, motivator, where has storytelling played a role in what you do?
Well, in trainings, in a lot of trainings that we do, we tend to use different stories to try to get a point across. Be it, especially in China, we use things based on Chinese history, Chinese fables, and all that. The question is, how do we then get the right story for the right
The
context?
right story. Okay. And for that moment, yeah. Okay. Thanks a lot again.
No problem.
Can I?
Yeah, here.
Yeah. One of the challenge, if I come back to the management side, one of the biggest challenge for companies is change management.
Yes.
So how to use stories
For that.
for that to support innovation, to support new ideas, to support change?
Yeah, actually, this was one of the overriding theme today.
Yeah.
So what you've touched on, what you've all touched on in a way, is that there are different worlds to storytelling. So there's the world of storytelling as part of presentations. You know, you're in front of people and you want to make a point. Now there's another side of storytelling for change management, in which it's a two-way street, two-way storytelling. So this is a little bit different than I speak, you listen. This is where you want to actually engage the different people throughout your organization, invite them to tell their story so you understand what's happening when you want to change the whole direction of the company. You want them to buy in. So there's buy-in, I want to sell a car. Buy-in, I'd like to sell the stock of our company. You know, that's one kind of. But here there's a buy-in about, will the employees go along with the vision of the management? Because as we know, so much of change management doesn't work. And CJ puts that in his newsletters, how much 90%, 70% does not work. So storytelling is another tool to do a little better. All right, so that's just the overview of where we are. Now I'd like to just share. Recently I visited New York City. And in New York City, they have a memorial to the 9/11, to that day. Museum.
Yes.
Yeah. And in the museum, they play the voices of those people on those planes who are calling their loved ones. The plane's been hijacked. Love you. Maybe it'll be the last time they ever leave a message. And then you see the fire truck that was crushed. One of the responders, the emergency vehicles, they're right there at the tower that collapsed. Well, no one was expecting the tower to collapse. And you see the fire truck right in the museum that was crushed. And you see, of course, they have to play the videos over and over again of the plane going in, and then another plane going into the tower. And all these, and then the various letters back and forth and messages back, and the intensity of the moment. And when I left the memorial, let's put it this way, there was a before Larry and then there was an after Larry. when you tell a story, you'd also like that person, they're this way, and then after, they're that way. That was me. When I went in, even though I saw the news 10 years ago when this happened, and I was reading all the news about it, and playing the videos over and over, so I know it was real, but 10 years is a long time. It's no longer happening now. And when I was in the middle of that memorial, it became current, alive, almost, let's say, concrete, even though it's real enough. In a way, because of the passage of time, it became abstract. History. Something happened before, and now life goes on. History. But in that museum, I experienced what we'd all like, I think, from storytelling. That something that was abstract or history that happened another place, another time, didn't really affect me exactly, but suddenly, emotionally, I was touched. And what had been, in my mind, abstract was no longer abstract. I could feel the anguish of those people calling from the plains. I could feel the intensity, what it must have been like to be a first responder, and so on. And so when I left, even though no one was really organizing all this information and how I should feel about it, I left with a feeling, I want to do something. Or, let's put it this way, if I was in a position to do something today, I would be motivated to do something. It was a transformation that before I went in there, yeah, that was history. I know I'm going to see something. I know what I'm going to see. But actually hearing it again in that moment made it come so alive that I told myself, if I were in a position to do something, I would want to do something. I felt motivated. I had that much impact. And it made me ask the question, in the last 10 years, has the United States and its allies and friends around the world, have we learned anything from what happened 10 years ago? And so I use this as an example of what a story can do. Now you would say maybe, but that wasn't really a traditional story with a certain structure. But here's where I'm going with this. Story is a tool to exchange meaning. So I feel urgent about something. You want buy-in, and you have a reason why. You have urgency. You want that. You have a message you want to deliver. You have certain urgency. You have a feeling in mind. You have the case that's urgent, that the family is struggling with, and you have it inside you. How can you get them, the other side, to feel it? So my definition of story is broader than, let me tell you a story. It's however you do it, it's taking that emotion, that image, that memory that you have, and somehow having the other person feel what you feel, so that they'll be as motivated as you to do what you think would be proper based on that emotion. So I use when I went into that memorial as an example of a story, even though it's not packaged in that same way that you were expecting me to deliver. We'll do some of that, but I just want to broaden the definition right at the beginning of what a story is. It's anything that exchanges meaning so that you feel what I feel. And the other point that's very closely related to this is, you know, there's the old saying, if the tree falls, but you didn't hear it or see it, was there a sound? If no one heard it, was there a sound? I feel exactly the same way about storytelling. For example, a couple of us said, well, if I tell a story, you know, how much to leave in and how much to leave out, and you're worried about that, and is it the right story for the right moment, for the right audience? But it's still a story, but maybe not for that audience. Where I'm going with this is it a story if they didn't hear it deeply inside, if they didn't get the meaning that you wanted to convey? I believe a story, the most important part of the story is what's going on in the listener's mind. If I can affect any of you by what I say or a video or anything, then we've conveyed, then the story cycle, the story process is complete. But if I'm here, no matter how eloquent, no matter how polished, if I tell a fantastic story, but it doesn't touch you, it doesn't do anything, I leave you with this question: is it really a story? Because in my definition of a story, the story involves two parties, the storyteller and the story listener. So I want whatever techniques that you make, whatever ideas you get today and in the future, remember that the purpose of a story is to have an impact, buy-in, motivation, delivering messages that stick, whatever it takes. So that's my overview, my definition. So we start out with that definition. Any questions, thoughts? Is it different than what you were thinking? We can go on. I want to just show a few slides. Mostly it's going to be like this. I'll ask questions, I'll say a few things, and invite you for more comment. But what I like to do now is show you where storytelling has had an impact in the world of business. NASA. It's the American Space Agency. Saatchi, one of the world's largest, most prominent advertising firms, now based in New York. And since we're talking about banking, there's a little tiny bank in Texas. Actually, it's called a credit union in the United States because it was affiliated with an oil company. So it was originally for oil company employees. So there's 3 examples, and then we could talk about other examples, but just to give you an example of where storytelling had an impact, all these three organizations had challenges, tremendous challenges, and storytelling was the solution. The first 2 were billion-dollar companies, organizations. Obviously, NASA is dealing with billions of dollars. And there was a point. Lee mentioned an excellent point about stories. He says, well, how can you deliver a story where you're not talking down to somebody? It's, so often people associate storytelling with stories you tell kids. Now here we're dealing with business. So you don't want to talk to them like they're kids. So storytelling has a place in the adult world. So I'm just making this point that billion-dollar organizations take this topic seriously. Now see if you can recognize this image here. You recognize it? Yeah, 1986. 1986, Challenger explosion. Yeah. 7 astronauts died. 7 astronauts died. And beyond the 7 people who died, it was a terrible blow to the reputation of the U.S. space program, which had been so successful. And the investigation revealed that 50% of the reason for the tragedy was engineering. But the other 50% dealt with this word called culture. And so, as a solution, they incorporated storytelling training into the world of the space agency. So this is $1 billion organization that took this idea of exchange of meaning seriously. The idea is, there was an elephant in the room. Everyone know the phrase elephant in the room? Elephant in the room. Maybe in Chinese. Teresa, you know how to explain elephant in the room? No. Okay, elephant in the room. Elephant in the room is the idea.
房间里有大象.
Yeah. You got it? You got it? You got it now?
No, they didn't get it.
Okay, the idea is there's something going on, but nobody wants to talk about it. It's too sensitive. Like you see somebody doing something like the boss, but you couldn't talk about it. It's the things you feel you shouldn't talk about, but maybe are the most important to talk about. And so that was what was happening at NASA. So with the storytelling program that they started, they say now we can talk about all the elephants in the room. And in fact, we need to hear. We need to hear. All right, so that's the elephants in the room story. So that's also a little bit about change management. We'll get later how you actually do the change management with storytelling. Now, in the case of Saatchi and Saatchi, the two brothers, Saatchi and Saatchi, who were the founders, they left. It was like, suppose you're a teenager and your parents said, we're leaving. We've had enough. Bye-bye. You are on your own. And that's what happened with the company. So they hired somebody who had been a customer of Saatchi and Saatchi. And he became passionate about storytelling. He would do what he called story listening. He had a way of prompting you to say something that the only way you could say it would be in a story. And we'll talk about that later. Tell me about a time when, and so forth and so forth. And he would tell stories. So everything was about story. When he first took the job, and everyone realized there was a problem, morale was down, he gathered 200 of the top leaders of the company for a meeting. And now they could have shared a PPT. This is where we are today. You see the numbers are starting to go like this, but we need it to go like this. And here's some new targets. Here's some new initiatives. Here's some new strategies. We're going to hire this person. We're going to hire. He didn't do that. No business talk. It was just, who are we? What do we need to do to achieve greatness? Where in the world is our place? These kind of questions, these kind of stories. And he shared story after story of the moments when Saatchi and Saatchi achieved greatness. And so that inspired people. And they continued after that meeting to go around the world and invite people from around the world to share their stories. For a long time he did this. And finally, the company recovered its greatness and morale, and they continue to do marvelous work. So that's storytelling, sort of a change management. We're not doing well. Now what should we do? And so they just sought their own internal resources to achieve their goals. Storytelling was the solution. Now, they maybe have done other things too, called in lots of experts and so forth, but storytelling was a key element in their new future. One of the things that came from storytelling with Saatchi and Saatchi was when they completed this task of listening, of story listening, and rediscovering their greatness that their 40 years, they said, they came up with a slogan. We are a company of 40 years where nothing is impossible. 40 years of nothing is impossible. So that's, when they look back, they took all the stories and all the experiences they had, and they realized they are a company where nothing is impossible. And you can go to their different headquarters around the world, and they have that engraved. And that served as, well, they say that served as a key element, a key little detail to help the company turn around. When you can focus all those emotions and those stories into one phrase, nothing is impossible. In fact, we've been 40 years of nothing is impossible. That helped to refocus all the employees on where they're going. But they were able to arrive at that because they listened to each other. Stories, storytelling. And then there was the bank story, which was the simplest story of all. Oh, yeah, nothing is impossible. Okay. The story of the bank. It's a tiny bank. I use it because you may be dealing at some point with relatively small businesses, or in your experience in the past or the future, or even now, you may have a client or some relationship where they're not $1 billion company, but stories can be useful there too. The challenge was they had a name, and a name that did no longer serve the company's purpose. The name did not tell the story of who this company was. It affiliated the company with the old ownership, which was oil companies. But they're no longer in the oil business. They were separated. But still kept the old name of something, Texaco, whatever it was, oil, credit union. And so one day, the CEO's flying, and he's talking to a customer or potential customer, and the customer told him, well, I guess you have to be an employee of that oil company, right? Because it says Texaco, blah, 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 credit union. And that was the perfect story to take back to the board of directors and say, see, I told you that in the public, people think that we have to only serve the oil community. See, the customer on the plane said no. See, he represents what everybody in the community is thinking. See, I told you so. We need to change the company name. I've been telling you this for years. It no longer applies. We're losing business. They're thinking our credit union is not for them. They're thinking it's just for people who are employees of the oil company. See? And then they changed the name. But the other thing they did, they just didn't change the name. They realized they did have a lovely history that involved the oil company. So what they did was, for 5 weeks, they have story. They shared a story. They gathered all the people from the company in the auditorium, and they made like a storytelling festival to honor the past. So it wasn't. See, there were a lot of people who were very proud about the past in this company. So whenever you do these changes, the idea is honor the past so that people don't feel sort of disrespected. Because a lot of the people who are on the board of directors, they resisted because they came to this credit union through the oil company. Their family and relatives and their neighbors that all worked at the oil company. So just to say we're no longer with the oil company, that was kind of painful. So what they did was, every week, for 5 weeks or so, they had storytelling for different great moments, milestones of this credit union and the oil company, and blah, 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 and now where they are. And then finally a story about where we are now. So storytelling is very emotional. Even a simple thing like a name change, that's the point. Even a simple thing like a name change, which seems obvious to everyone, was really an emotional issue at the board of directors. They said, no, we all came from the oil, how can you do that? And that one story that the guy got from the customer sitting on the plane, that was enough to say, now I understand. This is an example of exchanging meaning. They didn't get it before. You could have all the PowerPoints you want, the logic why we should do it, but a simple story that made it real and concrete said, okay, the board of directors, I got your point. And that was like me going to the 9/11 memorial and reliving the whole thing so it became current, present, now. I could feel it, concrete, even though I remember it 10 years ago. So in every way, storytelling makes meaning for impact. It stimulates memories to make what was in the past current so that you'd like to take action now. Okay. So these are companies that are very serious companies, have a lot of money to spend. They could have done anything to go through their transformation, but in each of these cases, they used stories. Any thoughts?
So what was the story that the current company used to convince the board of directors?
That one. That one. When the customer was sitting on the plane next to the CEO, and you're having a chat. Oh, what do you do? What do you do? Where are you from? And the customer was the person, the passenger was telling the CEO, oh, you're with that oil company credit union. And then this was the key question, CJ. This was the one that made it the story. He says, but don't you have to be from the oil industry, from that oil company, to participate in the credit union? That was the question.
And the answer was no.
And the answer was, but the important thing was that represented probably what the community out there was thinking.
Uh-huh.
And the CEO who was hearing this had been trying to make that point. Guys, we're losing business because our name, which has the oil company in the name, is telling people what that guy was thinking. You got to be in the oil industry, in that company, to participate. And that was a long time ago. They had cut the ties with the oil company, but the name lingered, and the perception still lingered in that customer on the plane. So he just told this simple little stupid story, and then people got
Right.
it.
This,
Did I answer your question?
Yeah. Yes.
this resonated with me, Larry. Has everybody heard of Shanghai Center in Shanghai? The
Oh,
Shanghai Center? What people don't know, that for 5 years it was called the Shanghai Exhibition Center North Complex. That was the name of the project. And it took a long time, but we were able to change the name to Shanghai Center, but there was a long story behind that. But we knew that that didn't tell the picture of what Shanghai Center was all about.
But it
I'm
took
not
a
going to
while.
tell the story now.
But
What's that?
But it took a while, right? to
Yeah,
change
it did.
Yeah.
It was difficult because when we wanted to call it Shanghai Center, but the Chinese government said there's only one Shanghai Center, and that's the Shanghai People's Government. So then a whole another,
Oh.
yeah.
Yeah, same idea.
Right. So
Same idea.
we came across. Yeah, we had to come up with a compromise.
Okay. Now, I mentioned I wanted to broaden the definition of what a story is. And then I want to go into what's the traditional type of storytelling, because I know that's one reason you want to put in what are the elements of a story. So I want to do that. But there's another, so for example, suppose we had an incredible photo here, or a very, very short video, maybe even a poem, or a quote, that was so well selected, it really tells the story. Wouldn't that be useful? I mean, if it serves your purpose to get people from the before, like remember before I went into the memorial, and then how I felt after. Remember that transformation? Or before the bank name, and then after there was a transformation. So if you have a photo or a video or some other method that shares an emotion or stimulates a memory, causes an impact, why not consider that? So when you're doing presentations, for example, suppose you're doing cars, I don't know, and you show a photo of something that's riveting, and then you can talk about it. And why are you showing that? And then you say, well, because this links to that, and that's my point, and this is what we're going to talk about today. And people will never forget if it's the right image, if it's the right quote. And then towards the end of your speech, you can come back and replay that so that there's a complete cycle. Okay. One other type of story, before we get to the elements of the story, of this traditional story, I want to share one other type of thing that, let's see. Okay, all right. Here we are. I couldn't resist. We don't have sound though. We could have used that once. All right. So here's a story. We're talking about. Oh, by the way, I did 4 presentations to not to kids, just to teachers, Chinese teachers in Zhuhai. And they have to take my message, my technique, and apply it to kids. But I'm talking to them like adults. And here's kind of where the bridge is between kids and adults that you can use sometimes in the workplace. So James Cameron, he's the director of Titanic and Avatar, right? Now he did something. Most people, that's all they know. But on March 26th, this date, he achieved a childhood dream. Now, why is this important? Why would I tell this to school teachers? Because they have 80 children. And what better time to start to influence those kids, at that age, and let them know what's possible. Just start now. So in my presentation there, I'm sharing how a childhood dream, starting at the age of the kids that are in front of you, in front of the teachers, how it grew and grew and grew and was achieved during adulthood. He dove to the deepest place on earth. And then here we would have the video, and there it is. You would, oh.
Here we go. Moment of truth. Oh, that's not good. Got a lot of failures here. You got a problem. When these really not this emergency, say pretty soon you realize you're in this that coffin. Substances
But there's no.
Maybe just risks shouldn't be taken. The consequences to our families are too great. I'm ready to decide.
It's just very short.
Exploration comes with risk, but it's a risk that's worth something. It's that need to see what's there beyond the edge of your lights, to see the unknown for yourself. It's the force that drives all exploration, curiosity.
So sometimes, when you want to influence, inspire, motivate, you can use a story of somebody else's success or how they overcame challenges. So my technique sometimes in these presentations, when I'm actually doing a workshop like that, I'll take something like this, but keep it short as possible. You just want the flavor. You don't want a whole documentary because you wouldn't have time for a real training. So 15 seconds, 20 seconds, 30 at the max, just to touch people. And you can do this even in a workplace. You want to inspire some employee you're having trouble, show them something inspiring sometimes. So that's one form. Okay. And then he gives a speech, Cameron gives a speech about where he learned about leadership. Again, you can model this, you can, if the topic is leadership, you want to inspire your leaders. What is leadership? Where did they learn it? What is it? What could it be? Here's a guy who he was already successful, world famous. He had made the Titanic, but it was only after Titanic, during the process of building this vessel and doing that deepest dive, that's when he said he really learned what leadership was. It's about respecting the people you work with, choosing people you respect. You earn their respect. That's when he learned about leadership, which is surprising because he was already successful. You would think, oh, why does he even talk about it? But this experience had such an impact on him. So that's another tool to reach people, to make this abstract topic concrete. And the idea about storytelling, more than anything else, and I'm just repeating this thing in different ways, it takes something that's abstract and lets you feel it, make it concrete. So if I talk about leadership, it's like I can't really feel it. But if you hear him speak and you see him do that dive and it was a childhood dream and what are the challenges he overcame, then you can feel it. You can feel the one. You want to say?
No, nothing.
Okay. Stop me anytime. Okay. Now, all right. This is the last thing before we'll maybe take a few minutes break. But there's Coke can. You can feel the Coke can, right? The coldness, right? You can imagine putting your hands in there and the little water drains off and it's very cold and maybe you have to dry it off. So it's a sensation, right? And everyone knows Coke, and you know what it's going to taste like, more or less. Okay. A few years ago, there was a family of 5. They were stranded in the Pacific Ocean. They were there for several days, just bouncing around on some raft. And finally, there was some Navy plane who was sent out to search for them, and they found them. All right, that's a nice story. So that story, the Navy communications officer reported that the Navy crew found this family of 5. Happily, they're all safe. End of story. So that little story of rescue got a little news item on the Navy website, and that was all. And it didn't do anything more. That was all. Then, and it was also on the Navy communications officer put it on his blog and Twitter or something like that. And then somebody asked a question. But how did they find them? And so the Navy officer called around. How did you guys find them? We'll use some kind of mirror. What kind of mirror? And they kept on asking the question. Asking the question. You see, asking the question, diving in, researching more. This is like journalism. So sometimes storytelling requires a little journalism technique. So they asked the question, what kind of mirror? First was, how did they find them? And it was a mirror. And then somebody on the blog from around the world asked, well, what kind of mirror? Because that would be pretty cool. What kind of mirror? I'd like to know. I'm going to carry it on the raft with me. And then they called around, and it found out it actually wasn't a mirror. It was the top shiny side of the Coke can. Then with that, then he rewrote the story, rewrote the article about the rescue. Coke can saves family of 5 in the Pacific. That story, you see? That story was picked up by USA Today. It became national news because of a stupidly tiny detail. Now, this doesn't have all the elements of the traditional story, which I'm going to share with you, the elements. We call this an anecdote. You know the word anecdote? It doesn't have, there's not really characters that you can feel. I mean, it's a family of five. They're not engaged in the story. There's no dialogue. There's conflict in that as well. Somebody could have lived or died. But the anecdote is that this is something so unusual, like a Coke can saved the family of five. It's an anecdote. And it's I think it's memorable. Look, Greg liked it.
I loved it.
Yeah. So anyhow, in your storytelling, so I've given several examples today that are different than what you were probably thinking about storytelling, but each of them can have the impact that you're looking for if you just apply them in the right way and at the right time in a natural way. And that is the end of my opening overview. Well, should we take a few minutes, break or continue?
We got a room till 10. Why don't we continue for a while and then have some Q&As?
I'll just keep on going.
Yeah, let's keep on.
There's no, okay, here we go. 1 second. Dougie shot.
Do you have a coffee story, Larry? Sure.
I have a question. What would have happened if there was one Coke can and one Pepsi can?
Now that's a story, right?
Yeah, the Coke can worked, the Pepsi can didn't.
Yeah, I mean, it might be that there would be the two cans. We tried both, but Coke, was shinier. It didn't work.
Sometimes the Pepsi challenge.
Yeah. But it helps to be clever with this kind of question.
How much Pepsi finally
The question would be which can do you see first?
Yes. Which candy is
5
first?
kilometers away.
Now, I think we've just demonstrated a certain point. If you have the right tiny, stupidly tiny detail, people will laugh, they'll talk. I mean, this was just this much of the big story. It was the drama of the family of five. But nobody was really excited about it here. I mean, you should have said, clap, wow, that's great, the baby saved them. But nobody did that. But you did get excited about a stupid Coke can. Keep that in mind, it's the details. And in your, future life journey as storytelling, sometimes it takes that kind of digging and asking to get that detail until finally, you ask somebody some question and they answer in a way you say, I didn't know that. And whenever you can experience that, I didn't know that about you. Really? Then you're on the way. That's that kind of reaction you're looking for. Then you can start to work with that story and polish it. And maybe that's one that goes in your archives. So, Coke cans, beautiful. I mean, I don't drink Coke, I haven't drank Coke, but it's great. I call it the Coke can storytelling effect, the Coke story, because it illustrates, in storytelling, people asked, and workshops they always ask, how do you make a story work? What are the details you want to put in and what do you take out? This tiny detail, what it does is it focuses your mind so sharply on one item that is so concrete and familiar that everyone can identify with. And it has sensations. There's the coldness, there's the ice and so forth, and the taste has many sensual properties that your body instantly gets the whole picture. I say Coke can, you see the picture, you got it. Very easy to connect with an audience. So consider when you're crafting stories or thinking about stories, that principle. So you would ask yourself, is there an element in your story that when I tell it, it could be a simple quote? Is there something that when the audience goes away, they can boil the whole story down to one word even is the best. In this case, I can spend 200 words on the rescue, the Navy, the ship, blah, blah, blah. But it all comes down to Coke can. So in your storytelling, you know, you'll have maybe 200 or 300 words. Is there one bit of it? It could be that quote. For example, in the bank case, it was, I thought you needed to be a member of, an employee by the oil company. It's not so glamorous, but for the bank, that was a big deal. I mean, for us, we're not talking about that here, but if you were in the bank, that was the equivalent of the Coke can storytelling effect. So keep in mind that whatever you do about creating stories, craft them in a way that it focuses the mind. That's the goal. That when people walk away, they say, they can still think about those words. That image, that memory that is stimulated. Okay.
Larry, are we looking at something that is more dramatic, something that is unexpected in stories like this?
Well, one of the techniques in storytelling, and actually in public speaking in general, is you need to engage the audience.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the tools, and you probably know this, is that audiences love something unexpected. If you just tell them things they already know, unless you package it in a really clever way, it's, well, I already know, I've got to go. Okay, so that's my best answer. Now you asked about dramatic. In the workplace, people are really busy. And if you go up to somebody and say, look, let me tell you a story, you know, first of all, they're going to think, oh my, this is going to be dramatic. I don't really have time. And, you know, and am I going to have to cry or laugh? Well, you know, in fact, another tip, since you mentioned it, is whenever you're about to deliver a story, in business especially, or presentation, I strongly suggest don't ever say, let me tell you a story.
You're going to love this one.
Because the word story, for example, conveys this idea of you telling a story like you would for your children or something. It's just everyone was raised that storytelling is for kids. So, but this is storytelling for adults, for billion-dollar companies. So you just kind of slide into it. Are you with me so far? Okay. Now we're going to do a little exercise. See, I shouldn't have said that. Because now you're thinking, oh my God, I've got to take notes. Bob didn't take the money. I don't know who took the money, but Bob didn't take the money. Bob worked for a shoe company. In fact, if you think about it, a shoe company, how much money could there be? So not much money to take, right? Back in those days. Anyhow, Bob didn't take the money. Well, he could have, because Bob went through a very expensive training program for this shoe company. And at the end of the training program, they said, well, Bob, and they said this to all the employees that went through the training program, they said, Bob, look, if you're not happy with us, now that you know our values and our mission and so forth, look, we'll give you $5,000 if you just quit. I mean, if you're not really happy with us, just here's the money, we enjoyed meeting you, here's $5,000, and enjoy your life. Bob didn't take the money. A lot of other people didn't take the money. Probably some people took it, but Bob didn't. And one day, while Bob didn't take the money, he took a phone call, and that phone call had a big impact. On the phone call, it was a routine phone call. It was a call about a woman who got the shoes. This shoe company, by the way, back then and probably still now, they sell their shoes online. You order them online, and shipping paid both ways. Well, not Not then, but now they do. Anyhow, they sell the shoes online. So somebody called, we got the shoes, thank you very much. Oh, good. Well, how can I help you? Well, by the way, and the shoes arrived on time and they're in good condition, just what I wanted. The woman said. Well, okay, well, how can I help you? Bob's on the phone asking, well, how can he help this woman? And then the conversation changed. Well, the shoes were for my husband. I was going to give them when he came home from work that day. Okay. Well, he never came home. Killed in a car accident. If you were the customer service person, well, what could you say? I mean, you could say, well, we're a shoe company, we got you the shoes, and we got you the shoes on time. Well, she wouldn't want to hear that, really. You couldn't remind her that, her husband just died. Well, you could say, okay, well, how about this? Shipping, you want to return the shoes? Shipping, no charge. Cost, we'll take care of all the costs. Just really sorry about you. Could have said that, right? Well, and she did. But it was one other element that she said. One other thing she did on her own initiative, based on all that training. She learned to think independently in the interest of the company. What she said, what she did, not what she said. She sent flowers to the widow. It's a shoe company. They're not in the flower business. They're not in the sympathy business. They just sell shoes. But she, as a customer service person, dealing with a very distraught person on the phone, she sent flowers. And then the woman got the flowers. She took those to the memorial service where there are 30 very close friends and family members around. And the people were so touched by this gesture, they all became customers of that company. That company is called Zappos, Z-A-P-P-O-S, which grew up based on the principle that customer service is number one. Spend on customer service, quality. Marketing, keep it as low as possible. Let the customers tell our story. So what better way to tell the story of this company than by doing what she did, a small investment of sending flowers. And then those customers, as I say, they became customers. And what happened in 10 years, based on this type of customer service, well, the flavor of that customer service, the caring, not always sending flowers, but whatever else they do, 10 years later it became $1 billion company. Selling shoes online and other things. Just putting all their resources into customer service. Forget about, the typical marketing. And that worked. There's nothing stronger than a story that a customer tells another customer. So this is storytelling in a different way. This is influencing a customer and their feelings based on the experience that you had in such a way that your company story becomes their story. So if you're in the hospitality industry, you are in the business of creating an experience, not just giving somebody a bed. Think about it that way. And in banking, I would think it's the same way. You create an experience, people say, yesterday I was a new customer at a bank myself, and I went in there and they made me wait for, must have been almost an hour. I'm a new customer, they should have signed me right up. Here's the VIP desk, we love new customers, but they made me wait at the cashier, just a regular old customer. I wanted to leave.
Should have gone to Stan Chai. Yeah?
No, please. The way is really bad as well. I feel, ashamed when
But-
you share that story because I just don't think that
They have the spirit or something.
the banking services here in China really understand the true essence of customer service, and this is why we're giving them quite a lot of stories.
So we have an opportunity here to change the history of that company and make an impact on the banking industry.
Yes.
And everyone will follow your
Yeah.
lead. I can't wait to start now. I'm available tomorrow, by the way. All right, so that's it. So now, let's do an exercise. Okay, in this story, there's several elements that I'm suggesting are parts of standard storytelling, the traditional storytelling. Let's see if you can identify some of this, and I'll help you through this. And then the idea is that once you have sort of a template, it's always going to change from case to case, but just gives you the rough idea of some of the key elements. Then you can apply those, to an exercise we can do later if we have time, or in your future journey. Okay, so let's go through what are some of the key elements that made this a story. Well, back up. There are two kinds of a conveying of information. I could just do a summary. For example, I got a call. It was really a difficult call. We solved the call. The customer was happy. In essence, that was it, right? More or less, huh? But that would have missed the spirit of the thing, right? But when I ask for a story, I've gone to Toastmaster meetings and I've gone to companies and I said, "Oh, tell me a story." And what I got was, well, they do the summary thing. Well, we had a rough day on the job. I had to fire that person, and it was just an outline. It's not the story. So what made this different than an outline? That's the key thing. So in your world, since you asked me about what is storytelling, I bet if you typically ask some customer, some employee, tell me a story about, they would just give you the summary outline. You'll have a very talented, outstanding employee. You might go on a limb and he'll tell you something that's a story, but probably it's the exception from my experience. All right, so what are the elements that made this, I hope you believe, a story? What do we have? Okay. Yes, please. Emotion, okay. Well, you can put it down.
Oh, you sure?
But you need an emotion. Okay, not bad. But all right, let's put it this way. Emotion is, say, a result of the elements of the story. Okay, so we want the emotion, at least a little bit of emotion. But what are the elements that create that? That's what we're looking for.
I thought it was like a journey.
A journey.
Being led from one point to another point.
Yeah. So
And moving.
and again, all right, you can put journey. All right, so it's emotion and journey. Put emotion and journey. But then after that,
You had a strong opening. That started.
yeah.
We didn't know where it was going at first, so it was kind of caught us by surprise.
Suspense.
Yeah. Oh, suspense. So it's like a movie.
Yeah.
And there's a
with dialogue. Yeah.
All right, so let's now get on to, but now I want to show you the elements underlying that lead to some of these things.
Right.
We have it's a journey, we have unexpected, all right, let me help you. Since according to CJ, we actually have to leave before the sun goes down today. Oh, exaggeration is very useful in public speaking. Okay, so we had characters, right? We had the woman on the phone and the customer. She had two people, right? So we had characters, and you don't want to say, and characters, the idea of characters in a story, you don't want to say hundreds of people. We're just one or two. We want to be able to feel them, all right? So, and your work, you're dealing with hundreds or thousands of people a lot of times. But you want to tell a story, so the idea of the story is you just want to isolate a moment with one individual who symbolizes, represents, the whole community of, you know, the people you're headhunting for, or the clients, you know, just, I want to feel. It's all about creating a feeling, and you can't feel hundreds of people, you can feel one, or maybe two. So keep it to that. And then the next thing is, since we're on the topic of characters, did I tell you how tall these characters were? Did I tell you their nationality? Did I tell you what they were wearing? They were probably wearing underwear too. But anyhow, I didn't tell you any of those things. And so you asked me the question earlier, how much to put in, and see, I can tell a story with minimal detail, and still, you even said it took you on a journey. So that's an example. I didn't have to say, and he wore a hat, or he whatever. You would add those things if they were important, if they had something to do with something, your message, for example. But you only leave. Okay. Again, while we're on the topic of character and what to say, what not to say, the guide for what to put in, for what not to put in is, what is your message? And my message was, you know, this moment on customer service, supreme customer service. So I didn't need so much. I just needed that they were two human beings in a struggle of how to deal with this tragedy. All you needed to know was that, and it worked. So evaluate it, and it's true that the less is more. Because if you clutter it, then people get confused. I know, because I'm very good at cluttering. Okay, so, all right, so I hope you've learned a lot just on that. All right, the next thing is, we need context. Context. So that's 2 C's. There'll be another C in a minute. Context means time and place. Time and place. And then now the question is, well, why didn't I didn't give a date? I didn't give an hour of the day. What about time in that? It's situational. If you can feel the situation, that's good enough. You only needed to know the situation. If time was important, like, oh my God, I have to go, but I got this one more call, maybe you can add it that it was nighttime and it was the end of his shift. So you just decide. Since it wasn't important what time and what specific day, we leave it out, but we do describe the situation. Customer service person in the shoe company dealing with shoes on the phone. So there's the situation. That's the context. Okay? Question? So again, two elements, and I've explained what's important to leave in and what to take out to answer your question. I'll continue to answer your. It's one of the most important ones, what to leave in and what to take out. The third one, we had a bit of conflict. Conflict. It's like the conflict, a lot of times conflict is, in fact, maybe most of the time the conflict is internal in somebody's head. It's a psychological conflict. The customer service is on the phone with somebody who's distraught, and maybe they never, they just sell shoes. They're not used to this kind of a call. And so the conflict is, what is the best way to respond? I mean, you're shocked. So the conflict, I would say, is allow a little moment, slow that part of the story down to allow the audience to wonder, well, how did they? Or how would you, audience member? In other words, in the head, you can say, oh my God, this person got such a phone call. And then pause. Let the audience who's hearing your story ask themselves, how would you respond? And then we'll say, I can imagine Greg, maybe he doesn't know. That's really awkward. What to do. So that's a conflict. You don't know what's the rest of it. And then you're not given, it's not in the guidelines. You have to do this on your own. You can't say, look, let me get back to you tomorrow. She's crying now. So that would be, psychological conflict is maybe the most common conflict that we'll deal with. So conflict. And we don't say now in the storytelling, you see, you didn't hear me say, and now we're at the part of the conflict. And we just throw it out there, you know. And the conflict is usually delivered, there's something unexpected, and then you pause to let the audience digest it. For example, bad storytelling technique would be, I give you something unexpected and shocking, and no pause, and I just keep on going. It destroys the conflict. It destroys the value of what you're trying to do. You need to give the audience time to say, my God, what would I do? And then it becomes, the success of the story just lies right on. In fact, the success of many public speaking, many storytelling is based on the pause. No pause, basically no story. No story. Sit down, forget it. It's just that simple. Okay. And she has a story about the importance of pause. We can talk later about it. Right? All right. All right, so those are 3 C's. Then there was an action. So there's no story without action. So the next thing would be, okay, so there's conflict. Then he has to take, the customer service person has to do something. Do! Whatever it is. So took action, or you could put action, something. So the action was, he sent flowers to the widow, and that was the key distinguishing, that was the key unusual thing that happened here. Sent flowers to the widow after he thought about it. It was as kind as he could in all the other ways, which you might expect, but that was going beyond. Okay, so took action. So, for example, if you just had characters, and you had context and conflict, but no action, not quite. What you need the action, and then you need a result. What was the result? The result. So in this case, the result was. What would be the result? What happened? So send the flowers, and then what happened?
A lot more people were impressed after they became a customer.
Yeah, exactly. All right, they were touched. All right, they were touched. It made an impact. All right, so that's good. Now we're getting somewhere. Now, the most important part, so you're 90% of the way, according to our journey master here, we're 90% of the way to a successful story. We're not there yet. There's one more piece. And that piece is, what does it mean to the people listening? What does it mean to the audience? So you can have a beautiful story. You can have a beautiful story, but some link, some explanation at some point, why am I telling this story? Well, for example, maybe you're speaking to your customer service department, or you're speaking to customer service department in your bank, and then you tell this story, and the question's coming up in your mind, but we're not in the shoe business, we're in the banking business, they might say. And then, yeah, but people are the same wherever you go in the world, and they like to be treated a certain way. And with the right experience, in fact, they might remember us in a way that is beyond our expectations. You might give some statement like that, and then you can add something. So you need some link, whatever it is. So this is an example of a link, and then you can end it in kind of a very polished way. You can say, so if we're talking about banking service, you can some little statement like, remember the flowers. You have real people in front of you. Whether it's shoes, whether it's banking and they're waiting in a long line. What is the result you want? Maybe what we want is an experience they can't forget, and they will come back. And the message of the story is, most powerful story that you as a company can hope for is the story your customers will tell over and over again to the people they meet. And that's free. And you can't beat that. And that becomes a complete story.